fifth day we've been together, many of us, and it's been nice to get to know a number of you quite well. My name's Anthony Hibbard. I look after STEM at Avondale School, and it's an absolute privilege in the next 20 minutes to actually share with you our journey that we've been on this year. We've already shared a little bit with you, but first and foremost I'd like to welcome Dr. Louise Sutherland, our mentor Mr. Stuart Palmer. Everyone knows Stuart. And I'd like to welcome our principal, Mrs. Debbie Cooper. Alrighty.
He's on long service leave.
Thanks, Stuart. Thanks, Stuart. So look, just before I get more formally into the presentation I prepared for you, I just wanted to give you a little bit of background in terms of Avondale School and the STEM journey that we've been on to date. First and foremost, our different science, technology, engineering, mathematics faculties have been working together to try and break down the silo mentality for some years now, and we've had a STEM committee and we've made quite a bit of progress. But this year we have certainly, with the help of the Academy, made significantly more progress on many fronts, and those silo walls have started to fall even further. In terms of, at the end of last year, we actually had a restructure at our school and we formed 4 hubs. One of those hubs was a STEM hub. And so that gave us a fair bit of momentum coming into this year, which was very, very nice. In addition to that, within the last 18 months, not just our school, but our system of schools have decided to make project-based learning very much a focus of what we are doing moving forward. And so when we approached this year's project with the Academy, we actually took a project-based learning approach, as you will see. So, with that in mind, our journey really started back in 2014. Back in 2014, I actually saw this opportunity to do an online webinar. I think it cost $60, to actually do this with Judy. And the thinking that came from that, it really got us thinking. We took this back, we shared it at school, and we've shared that video with new staff even since 2014. Late last year, about term 3 last year, because we knew we wanted to be involved with the Academy, we actually took the time to go and visit one of the first schools that actually started with the STEM Academy back in 2014, and that was Mount Annan Christian College. And Jenny Young down there, who now heads up the STEM area down there, was so gracious, and we got a number of good ideas from that visit that we actually incorporated into our planning. There we have our head of technology and our head of science. We went down there and Jenny actually had us creating, and we learnt quite a lot. And we're very indebted to Mount Annan and Jenny. If you get a chance to go and see what they do some amazing things down there and have won some awards for their STEM Ed program. When we met together, particularly as a STEM leadership team, and this was nothing new to us, we were aware that in terms of particularly our science courses and our maths courses, the numbers of our students actually choosing those HSC Year 11 and 12 subjects was lower than what we wanted it to be. We are an independent private school, and our candidature was less than the state average in those. And so it's our hope that long term, that with things like initiatives like the STEM Academy, that we're able to actually turn that around a little bit. When we sat down, not just as a STEM leadership team, but as an Academy team, very early this year, these were the 4 areas, the 4 issues that we wanted to address. I won't refer to all of those in our time that we've got together. I've just mentioned the first, But the second has to do with project-based learning. Our system actually brought out leaders from the Buck Institute, now known as PBL Works, from America earlier this year, and trained all of the teachers and managers, leaders in our whole system. And so, certainly, as I said earlier, this is a big push for us. 2 weeks ago, this article was published. And many of these sorts of articles, if you're watching the media, are occurring quite frequently. Here, Professor Dirk Schulz-Makuch actually drafts this article entitled "A Million People on Mars May Not Be Wishful Thinking" in fine print, but colonists would have to change their diets and learn to eat crickets. He goes on, and I'll read it to you. It might be a bit small on the screen there. A sustainable, self-sufficient population of 1 million people can be achieved on Mars within 100 years, he writes, according to a new modelling study published by Kevin Cannon and Daniel Britt, both at the University of Central Florida. The study drew on a plan sketched out by Elon Musk of SpaceX, which begins with about 12 people landing on Mars, followed by multiple ships carrying 100 to 200 passengers at every launch opportunity, roughly every 26 months. The population growth is envisaged to be sustained both by immigration and by births on Mars. That's only a couple of weeks ago. If you go to the SpaceX website and you look at the information they have there about their mission to Mars, they're very, very clear. I'll read this to you as well. Our aspirational goal is to send our first cargo mission to Mars in 2022. That's not far away, is it? The objectives for the first mission will be to confirm water resources, identify hazards, and put in place initial power, mining, and life support infrastructure. A second mission with both cargo and crew is targeted for 2024, also not far away, with primary objectives of building a propellant depot and preparing for future crew flights. The ships from these initial missions will also serve as the beginnings of the first Mars base, from which we can build a thriving city and eventually a self-sustaining civilization on Mars. When we sat down here at the beginning of the year, we were aware of Elon Musk, SpaceX, and we started to think, hey, this could fit well for our school. And so we started to plan a two-part project-based learning experience for our Year 7 students. The first part, and I have talked here about this before, was entitled "To Mars or Not to Mars?" And our driving question was, what advice would you give Elon Musk about colonising Mars? Of course, very current and topical issue. One of the things we learnt when we visited Mount Annan Christian College was that collaboration is absolutely paramount. And in your schools, I imagine you've discovered the same, if not before the start of this year. But certainly when planning some fairly major project-based learning, collaboration is extremely important. As teachers, we're time poor. And so we use a collaborative Google Docs to assist us in planning. And it was colour-coded. I think red was maths, green was technology, blue was science. And that's how we actually really made some traction to start with. We, of course, looked at our scope and sequences and looked at where we could implement, and very, very privileged that each of the areas for STEM at our school were very, very willing to be flexible with their scope and sequences throughout the year as our planning continued to evolve. And so we did plan specifically to implement our units. Now, we actually started to plan a number of topics that we would actually teach, the skills that we knew the students would need when they actually started the projects more proper. And so before we had our launch, before the students even knew anything about Elon Musk and Mars, we actually had Mrs. Jenny Merriman down the front here in her technology class teaching students how to block code spherobolts in a unit called the Amazing Race. It was an amazing unit, and similarly, our mathematicians reworked a topic on geometry, a topic in angles, and taught the whole topic by using spherobolt robots. And so a lot of the coding skills were actually developed before we even launched our project. A lot of the algebra and equation work that you will see, we actually did well before we actually introduced algebra formally with our Year 7 students. And that was one of the very first things that we did, involving parabolas even, involving Desmos. Could our Year 7 students do it? Absolutely, and they did it extremely well. We wanted students to become familiar with vernier video physics because we wanted them to be able to use a knowledge of scale diagrams, which we had actually taught them, to actually do some calculations involving the trajectory of a projectile. In this case, it was a tennis ball. Still, we hadn't introduced anything to do with Mars, Elon Musk. This is student work right here. We had students in a competition who could throw a tennis ball the highest from one end of the cricket pitch to the other. And they had to video it with the software, they had to do the analysis. All of this before formal algebra had even been introduced. We were very, very proud with the work done by many of our students. Then came launch time. This is where we actually said to the students, hey, you know all this stuff we've been doing in science, technology, maths? Science have been doing some work on Mars and starting some work on sustainability. Launch time came. We introduced the topic with the Matt Damon movie, The Martian, where Matt Damon's up on Mars and can't get home and has to build a self-sustaining place for him to survive. We only showed a small clip of that. We introduced students to Elon Musk. Some of them had heard of him, some hadn't. And we did that a number of different ways. We then took the opportunity, and this was one of the highlights I think, we actually took the opportunity to introduce via a clip from Channel 10's The Project to an amazing Australian. His name is, and it escapes me, help me? Josh Richards, thank you. Josh Richards, he is part of the Mars One program. He has signed up more than 200,000 people in the world to be one of the first people to go on a one-way trip to Mars, never to return. We did a video link hookup with him. We had the students actually pen questions about going to Mars. Well, before we did the link up, we had our teachers vet those. We chose the questions that we thought were really good ones. And it was amazing. Have a look at this. Is there a way to design a rocket on Mars to get there?
I mean, there's lots of people that have already designed rockets that could do that. The issue is getting them there and the risk associated with trying to launch it in the first place. NASA is currently...
The questions the kids asked were just amazing, so insightful. Right. And that was our launch. That's what really got our kids excited. So then we had 2 weeks where we actually had our students doing 2 things. The first thing, we actually wanted them to use the design cycle to design water rockets, prototype rockets, to test those, to see which ones could go the highest, to do some analysis, some calculations, a lot of measurements involved. Launching the rockets was loads of fun. Have a listen to this. This is...
Really?
Yeah.
Alright. If there's not enough weight on the bottom than the top, as it's coming down, the nose will slip and you could break the rocket. So you need more weight on the bottom than the top, so as it comes down, it should land perfectly. That works.
I'm not sure I love the thinking, but the critical thinking involved by many of our students was just music to our ears as teachers.
Really?
Then, at the end of the 2 weeks, we actually came to a day of incursion. We had all of the Year 7 students to ourselves in the STEM faculty. And we changed things a little bit. With the rockets, we said, hey, here's your problem. For Elon Musk to colonise Mars, he's got to get a lot of stuff, a lot of resources from here to Mars. With your prototype rocket, we would like you to experiment, play with it, and to determine the maximum payload that your rocket can travel a scaled distance to Mars. We gave them some hints and skills along the way. But here is the sort of work. We even had kids using interpolation. Have a look. There's Mars up in the sky on the right-hand side. It will work. It's in slow motion.
How did you get Mars in a helium balloon?
That is a helium balloon, yes, yes. And I think this launch could have taken much more payload to Mars. And so our kids were varying the masses attached to their rockets and so forth. Not only did we explore getting to Mars, we looked at what would happen if we got to Mars and we wanted some unmanned transport exploration to take place. And that's where our spherobolts came in and our coding. And a lot of maths involved here as well. So our students, have a look at the top right. This was the goal, to visit various positions, places on a mock Mars landscape. And they had to actually, the challenge was to do that circuit twice, which then had ramifications in terms of how you would set up the block coding in terms of loops, etc. So our students enjoyed that on our day of incursion as well. We have 5 minutes left. We did a photo competition. We did a video competition. We had our pastor, school chaplain, come and talk to our kids about what going to Mars perhaps even means from a spiritual point of view. There were some amazing questions. For me, this was one of the absolute highlights of our program. One of the products that we wanted our students to complete, directly relating to our driving question, was what advice would you give Elon Musk? They needed to write him a letter. And some of the letters that we read certainly highlighted the amazing levels of learning that had taken place. We celebrated students, we surveyed them, got all sorts of information back from them. We asked them, do you think it's a good idea for Elon Musk to be working towards colonising Mars? We weren't sure how the students would respond to that. Perhaps surprisingly, 43% said yes, we think it is a good idea. Whereas 57% said no. And I think money was one of the big factors in their thinking. We did show students towards the end of term 2 some clips from the Inconvenient Truth. There's been 2 of those documentaries, and in one of those, Al Gore is seen stating, "Don't let anyone tell you that we're going to get it on rocket ships and go and live on Mars. This is our home, referring to Earth. And this was then our launch pad for part B of our project, which we borrowed the phrase, think globally, act locally. How can our small actions help preserve our world was our first driving question. The second one was more local to our Kurumbong area. If we're not going to send people to Mars, perhaps we need to look after our world, our Earth, that much better, and think about sustainability. You've got a copy of both workbooks on your table. Feel free to have a look at those. We launched. This was loads of fun too. How many of you have seen the documentary that's only just come out the last couple of months from Damon Gameau, 2040? If you haven't seen it, it's absolutely a fantastic resource and a great watch. We used that as part of our launch. In the documentary, Damon is thinking and exploring, what if we used everything we knew about sustainability and we were to implement all of the things that we know? What would 2040 look like if we did implement those things? And he explores that whole notion under the guise of what it would look like for his own daughter. Greta Thunberg has been very much in the spotlight, and we shared with students her TED Talk, an amazing TED Talk. She's a climate change activist, 16, and students responded well for that. But we then put to them, we said, okay, we would like you to come up with a strategy for sustainability practices that will help our planet Earth. We want you to come up with an infographic. We want you to come up with a multimedia type product. And we then want you to present your strategy along with your multimedia product to an inaugural Avondale School STEM Expo that we were going to invite parents to. And we did that. Have a look at this. This is part of the planning. Using that booklet, you look around the room, the engagement was very, very high. You can see superhero Mrs. Merriman there helping out a group in a cake. We had lots of fun. In mathematics at this time, we decided that we would introduce some statistics. We would focus on surveys, having kids create their own surveys, focus on the concept of bias, primary and secondary data in the context of their sustainability strategy. And so we spent about a week, a little bit longer than a week, doing that in maths, and we wanted them to include some of what they discovered in their infographics. Came night of the ARIC Expo. These two guys, absolutely amazing. We had awards. These guys came up with an idea of having a special ride to school day to actually promote riding over using your vehicle. And I even got an email from one of them late last term, I think it was in the holidays. Caleb wrote to me and he said, "Dear Mr. Hibbard, over the holidays I've had the earth on my mind. I can't stop thinking about our bikes versus carbon dioxide emissions. I am utterly convinced that this can change the world, but for now we need to change this school. I really want Ride Week to actually happen. I believe emissions are the thing that is killing us the fastest, but we also need to work on plastic pollution." Here we've got kids making bracelets and different artwork out of plastic bags. The group at the bottom left actually designed and built aquaponics. There are fish there, an aquaponics system to actually make their stand really stand out on the night, excuse the pun. They had sushi and different food giveaways. The group in the bottom right there, they actually came up with an initiative to make the school rubbish free, and particularly the primary students got so excited with the competitions that they ran. We had a few groups that struggled to get down to the local level, but they would argue black and blue that, for example, nuclear energy is definitely for the hunter. We had students exploring microplastics in Lake Macquarie. The list goes on and on. Endangered species in our area. We had a brilliant turnover. We awarded prizes. We had our technology area actually construct the trophies out of sustainable radiata pine. It was a really, really good celebration of what the students had done. Was there a change at the end of the second part of our project in terms of student thinking about Elon Musk colonising Mars? Not a lot, surprisingly. But what was nice was the huge percentage that actually now thought looking after our Earth was a great idea. Group work, our students certainly improved hugely in their ability to work together as a group. We spent a lot of time and effort working on that. Kids had the option to watch the documentary. And that was our two-part project. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we do have some time for some questions. So if we start with, first of all, any clarifying question? Anyone have something they wanted to?
Can I just invite my team to come out and join me? We'll just make a row across the front. Feel free to ask it, and feel free to throw in the answers.
You said at the start you created hubs. Is that for like the organisation of the school in terms of your staff
Yes, it
group?
was.
So it wasn't.
Yes, it was,
yeah.
correct. So we
Yeah.
had a humanities hub,
Yeah.
a STEM hub, they're the two bigger ones. Prior to that, we were very traditional in terms of different faculty areas, essentially standing alone.
So what advice would you give to other schools about that?
Now,
Being
Stuart,
thrown together in
is that a
into
clarifying question or is
Yes,
that
it
a...
is.
Happy for anyone in the team to...
Sorry, could you repeat the question because
So what advice would you give to other schools about the whole thing about one step is to get your faculties together in a physical place rather than in three different parts of the school?
not especially in a same physical space, but we do have the combined meetings and greater cross-faculty sharing and planning in terms of being intentional, being aware of what's on everyone's scope and how we can put threads together and make some commonality. Yeah.
I think time's very important, having time to actually meet together and to discuss.
Yeah.
Email just doesn't do it.
I think that was the biggest learning about the academy too. Like, if we had intentional, appropriate, allocated time, we could all achieve so much more. Because, with all due respect to the academy, it was fantastic and bringing it all together, but it put it at the forefront of a lot of schools' mind, and that message gets through to admin. The biggest thing is every school has their experts, but it's the time that prevents us from being as good as we could be, and to do this kind of thing, because we have everything else, it's just the time, I feel. Yeah.
Was this separate to assessment, or did you assess the students on what they did here?
It was this year. We've talked about if we continued it next year, we might add assessment into it. But yeah, this year we did keep it separate from assessment. We thought that the first time going through this, if there's any teething things, we would just keep that apart. I think we do feel relatively confident we could put assessment into that now.
I think we need to. The feedback from the kids in many ways was that the time spent, you know, they ranked and said, where's my marks? You know, like I put everything into this. So I think critically next year, if it goes like this, we would have to use it for assessment.
Yes.
In some way, shape or form. Because of the energy that goes into it, you don't want it as an extra. And then, you know, we did acknowledge them in the awards and all that, but obviously for some it was still important that, hey, that impacted my grade. And again, it's that time thing, better use of your time, isn't it? If you're doing all that work and you actually assessing to say, as Chanel said, that was our first run through to see, you know, how much is too much to try and achieve in the first go.
It looks like your students were quite engaged in the sustainability part and were talking about the ride to school and addressing plastic waste. Are you taking that on board in your school? Are you doing rides to school once a term, once a year? Are you doing anything about plastic waste so they feel that that work has meant something? Do you know what I mean?
I do. It's a great question, and to be as honest as we can, we could do more.
Yeah.
It's good though. Every day when I'm driving to school, there's a whole bunch of students I'm passing out every single morning that are riding their bikes. So we haven't got a ride to school week yet. It would be good if we actually did implement some of that. But they have actually stirred up a heap of their friends, and there's quite a group of us that are doing that every morning.
Plus things coming to us after. Yeah.
It looks as though you've really extended some of the kids into really statewide work.
Even six.
Yeah.
Yep.
How's that affected the scope and sequences for as they roll into year 8 and year 9? Have you looked at that?
It will certainly have a flow-on effect, but it's a good problem to have because the more we get done here at the Year 7 Stage 4 level, sure we will cyclic curriculum come back and look at those things, but we now have the option of a reference point that's in a meaningful context to the students that we can refer to, not just this year but in future years. So we're really excited about that.
Still on clarifying questions?
Oh,
And not. So the clarifying one is with the before and after. You said that the percentages basically remain pretty much the same, the fors and against, in terms of colonising. Did you pair them in any way? Is it possible that some of the yeses became noes and the noes became yeses? And so I just wondered, did you pair them when you looked at the results?
But that would, appreciate the question, that would certainly add more to the picture, which would be lovely to see.
And also perhaps a control group, which is another year, because obviously media has an effect on people's opinions as well, to see whether they might have changed differently to what this group changed. That'd be good for future if you're looking at this.
We did discuss in the car coming up here, because the second set of data that we collected largely was very recent, and we had the 3 different classes sitting or doing the survey at different times, and as we watched the results come through, surprisingly we actually saw quite a disparity between the groups, which we're not sure why.
This was a Year 7 group, yeah. Was it all of Year 7 who was, did you find that all of these were accessible for all Year 7s? I suppose I'm still thinking in terms of assessment and differentiation and whether they can all access it.
As far as the math side of things, I would say yes, because we had, for example, with the spheros and the whole angle activity, we actually did have a whole point system that I worked together with technology we put together, and there were points for their work both with the angle side and more the sphero side, technology side. And yes, there was considerable scope in there, and we found that everyone was able to access part of it, but there was a lot of differentiation between it. Even all the work that we did with who was able to throw the tennis ball the highest, and that was quite complicated mathematics there, going certainly into stage 5, possibly beyond. And I found that all of the students were able to do that. Some needed a lot more help. Some were able to just do it on their own. Some did need a lot of our support to get them through, but they were all able to actually have that completed by the end.
We did have a lot of video content resource for the students
Yeah.
to look at, re-look at their fingertips if they were having problems.
I think with the last two questions, we're going to run out of time.
Just a quick one, just on putting it together. The Mars landscape looks like a drop sheet that's been painted. Is it 2D, 3D?
3D.
We had, went to the food tech room, got lots of mixing bowls, so you couldn't probably tell, but we had mounds, and then I got some lava-looking rocks, and we put that around. And what was mentioned, you might have noticed in an image there, was a scale. We got a drone and had a photo of it, and the scale drawing from the maths part, so they could see those bases that they had to get to. So then they had to do the the aim was to do the calculation mathematically, code that, and then they just tested it around the course. So, yeah, that's how that worked.
And the way it worked was the first 3 stations were easy to get to. There wasn't anything in the way. The final 2, that was where the differentiation came in, were very challenging. There were mountains in the way, there were rocks in the way, and they had to navigate, so it required 2 or 3 steps.
You had to go in a particular order, or were they able to choose?
They were able to choose. We had it as A, B, C, D, but we said that E, but we said that they could choose.
Okay.
Most decided to do that, and we did have students finish the entire course.
And how big was that actual landscape, like roughly in terms of size?
It's the stage, wasn't it? It was kind of like, I'm not sure how many metres, was it what? Couple of queen size sheets?
It was so together.
Yeah.
So 2 coin sheets.
So it's a comment at the beginning, but a question of whether it was done. So big thing with mathematics, it's very deterministic, whereas with statistics, we understand variation. And so key part in experimental design is to do replication, because we know if we fire it once and then we did it again, we wouldn't hit the same mark. So I just wondered if that sort of concept was introduced to them, was utilised, and how they understood variation and what they did with that in particular.
So when they were launching their rockets in particular, for each mass, they would launch more than once, and they would average their results.
Maybe it's just a learning possible learning point that to understand that variation and why is it happening, and ask those questions.
Yes. Yep.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Join Avondale College at morning 2 and ask your other questions.
Can I just say one last thing? Folks, it would be remiss of us as a team not to acknowledge the absolute outstanding work of our mentor, Stuart Palmer. We could not have achieved what we did without his support. He is such an asset not only to the Academy, and I've said it to him before, but Stuart is a real asset to mathematics in New South Wales. And Stuart, because we actually very, very much appreciate what you've done for us, we'd like to call you out the front. We have something that everyone else probably won't understand, but you might. Thank you very, very much from us as a team.
Thanks,